we know this economy is going to tank again, okay, at some point. Okay, there's going to be another 2008 or worse. And it seems that what Take Back the Land is doing is extremely important, but that's like one prong of what needs to happen. The other prong is, for example, with people in Occupy, would be to push back against the city and demand the right for there to be permanent tent encampments, because if there's comes to be a depression in this country, a real deeper depression, then there will be Hoovervilles, and we may call them Obamavilles or Romneyvilles, but there will be a need to fight for the right to have democratically run, publicly facilitated permanent tent encampments on public land. And so it seems that at that point, the two prongs of like what you're doing and what people in Occupy or other movements might be doing, at some point will converge. And it may even go further than just demanding different use of the commons space or public space or community space. It may actually at some point down the road, and this has have revolutionary implications, it will be the public appropriation or community appropriation of a lot of private land that is not being used for the benefit of the people. Like all that farmland that's being used to grow, corn syrup, to make a lot of money on the international food commodities market, or land that corporations own of shopping malls that may become vacant. And so at that point, we'll have to push to appropriate private land. And so what Marcia's saying is right. I think that there's an ultimately an anti-capitalist thrust to this, a revolutionary thrust to this.
Well, let me put back on a little bit on a couple of things. One is just in terms of the, of course, I have a great concern that another dip in the economy would result in a bunch of shanty towns. And just so it's clear, in Miami, the first thing Take Back the Land did is we built a shanty town. That was the very first act that we did on Take Back the Land. But I think if we get housing recognized and enforced as a human right, then there would be no relationship between economic dip and shanty towns, because you couldn't get evicted from your home because you don't have a job. So there'll be no, the relationship happens is when there's an economic dip, you lose your job, and there's a direct correlation between your job and your housing. If we break the relationship between income and housing, then there'll be no need for that to turn into that. The other thing is I want us to be very, very careful and properly distinguish between a tactic and an objective. Having these encampments are tactics. It's a tactic that we want to utilize in order to embarrass the government. It's a tactic we want to use in order to provide housing when people don't have adequate housing. It is not a goal. It is not an objective. We don't want. We actually don't want people living in parking lots. That's not what we want. We want people living in decent housing that is standard. I think we need to change the definition of standard so that the standard doesn't destroy this planet, but it does need to be standard housing. It just need to be really, really careful to make sure that we don't put ourselves in a position of fighting for that. And this is happening. This is some quandaries that end up getting put in because of these bizarre fights we're having right now in this time, where many cities, for example, they're making it illegal for people to lay down in a park and try to sleep in a park and sleep on a bench. And then what the position we get put in is we end up fighting for the right of people to sleep in a park. But we shouldn't be fighting for the right of people to sleep in a park. We should be fighting for the right of everyone to have housing. And we just get put in these bizarro situations where we end up fighting for something that we actually don't believe in.
Why not both?
What's that?
I mean,
I don't want both of that. I don't want people sleeping in parks.
Well, I don't either, but if we can't keep them in their houses, in the meantime, I'm going to fight for the right.
No, I hear you. I just again want to distinguish between the tactic of sleeping in a park because you don't have anywhere else to stay as you're fighting, and the actual objective of that. Just be very careful about not conflating the two.
Oh, sorry, real quick, and I think the importance of distinguishing between the tactic and the objective, because one of the ways that played out here in Madison is, folks were fighting to keep Occupy on the parking lot, which is important. I don't think they should have been evicted. right? But then there's like this empty building right across the street. So why didn't we fight to keep the homeless in that day shelter before? You see, so I think I think the way we think informs the way we fight it, and then it informs the way we fight for it. So I just think it's important to distinguish, like he was saying, between the tactic and the objectives.
I think also something that you mentioned is, I think it's important for the city to have conversation on, is root causes, right? Because we're coming up with all these like solutions that only address and band-aid stuff. And the real root causes of poverty, or, I mean, the things, if we have these type of conversations, I think that we'll come up with alternative and very creative solutions. It's important that in all of those steps that people who are most impacted still lead the way for that. The problem with that is that, just speaking about Wisconsin, right? The problem with this is that if it predominantly affects women, if it predominantly affects people of color, we haven't built the leadership. We don't have a history of building these types of leadership in the state. Therefore, that's why that model right there hasn't worked for us, because we don't have people who are directly impacted in any of those, in decision making in any of those areas, right? Just like no one's in positions of power within Wisconsin to make any of these things happen. It's because we haven't built those leadership, nor have we been allowed in the state of Wisconsin to build those leaderships, right? And so I think that as folks who are now just like building a new core of leaders, of young people, or people of color, or women, I think that we have to be very intentional about that, and folks who have the power to give resources to build those leadership have to be very intentional about giving resources so that that can happen, because I don't think that a movement in Wisconsin can happen if those who are most impacted don't have the resources to build themselves and build their communities. And so this is something that, you know, we've been here 35 years, and I can tell you that we never had anything for us, and that we had to build from ground up. And I say anything, we didn't have no leadership program, we didn't have no one to tell us about our rights, we didn't have anything. And that if young people who are going to be most deeply impacted don't get these resources, it's not going to happen in Wisconsin. It's just too hard. I mean, when you're like, what, less than 10% of the population, but 60% of the population that's incarcerated, you already know where your home is, right? Or where your home's gonna be. So I just feel like in Wisconsin, it's a totally different animal, and we're like organizing it. Like Em said, you think, the other thing is tying it all back, like you think people are your allies, but really, like, allies really have to check themselves also, because you can't, I mean, the example is that when the senators fled, everybody was like, yes, you know, like, I'm like, if they come back and they say, you know, union rights, but they say deport the immigrants, like, that's not something that I'm going to support. But people didn't even think about that. Like, people didn't care, people didn't think about that. People are just like, you know, union rights, union rights. What about immigration rights? What about, like, poverty? What about, you know, so I feel like allies like really support one thing, and then they like totally bail on other things, and that's part of this disconnect. Right?
I was just curious about the shantytown you talked about at Moja Village, and how it would have been similar and different if you've been coming at it through this model back.
How would have been similar and different?
Coming from
this model that you've now developed.
How Moja Village would have been different? Oh,
Or similar.
I think of Moja Village in particular, I don't want to do too little context. Moja Village was a shanty town that we built. I think we would have been a lot quicker on the services for the residents. It would happen immediately rather than happening the way that it did, which is at month 4, month 5. And I think we would have had enough partners in place on the policy and the third way side that we actually would have left some lasting change besides the mark that it had on the community who saw that they could fight back in a particular way. I think we probably would have changed some laws, and I think we would have had a better chance anyway of ending up with control over the lot, which we did not have control. But I'm not positive that we would have gotten it, because there was a lot at stake there, but we would have had a better chance of having if we would have had those partners more securely in this.
One thing that I have a problem with, like, I love the model. I think that's what's up, and I understand how they feed into each other, how they need everything in order to create a successful movement. But so my problem is, it seems like public policy, even in the third way, has to do a lot with our ability to change folks' opinion on what we think is morally right, or what we feel like the fact that with our garden thing, we're having a hard time convincing people that folks should be able to eat. Folks should be able to garden in this space, and they should be able to eat, you know what I'm saying? And to me, I'm like, how much do we rely on that? What if we are never able to convince these, because I mean, truth be told, we are in a country that is built off the idea that some people will have a lot and some people have nothing, and that our human needs are commodified, you know what I'm saying? So how far do we go with wanting to change public policy? If we don't change public policy, is that it? Because I understand how everything is tied together, but I'm like, I feel like I don't really care about the laws. I'm like, I feel like I want to do what's right, period. You know what I'm saying? Like, I'm one of those that's like, I'm not trying to meet with the mayor. You know, I don't want to hear what you got. You know, I don't care. I'm not trying to negotiate. I'm not one of the people. You know what I'm saying? So how far do we go with trying to, if we never are able to, and it shows that we are never able to change the laws so that it reflects what we believe, and so we could create a better community and end homelessness, how far do we go with positive action? How far are people willing to go, you know what I'm saying, with just doing it? Like,
Well,
just do it.
I appreciate the dilemma of the question. I just want to make perfectly clear that with this movement model, you don't have to set up a false dichotomy. We're not choosing between, like right now, to Take Back the Land has been around since 2006. We still haven't developed our first policy demand yet. We've been around since 2006. We don't have a first policy demand. So we're not like in some rush to say we want to have some negotiation with the mayor and whatever. We're engaged in positive action. And so again, just in terms of pure movement models, purely, this will probably work best if the people who do the positive action do not do the policy thing. Because the reality is, if we have a deal to make and some bending to do and some compromising to do, we don't want you in the room with that. You know, and that's good. And we need to have, and the people who are in the room don't want you in the room, but they do want you outside so that it can put pressure, it can actually give them better negotiating position. All right, so let me ask you this, but to speak a little more directly, I don't want to skip it around it with that. So we're taking over homes, we're moving people in, and we're doing eviction defenses for people who've already been foreclosed on and no longer have a legal right to live there. Do you think that we should try to get people legal status, legal right to tenure there? Do you think we should not try to? We should be on 24/7 eviction watch for the rest of
No,
their
I
lives
think you should, but I'm just saying, if all of our energy is spent on making this legal, I think a lot of it, you know, I just think at some point we shouldn't spend all of our energy trying to convince folks with power that housing is human rights.
I got that. I just want to make sure that we got a lot of problems. That is not one of them. In fact, it's the opposite. We probably haven't spent enough energy figuring out the policy stuff. I just want to make clear that's not one of the problems that we spent all of our energy doing policy stuff. Many people would say it's the exact opposite. So let's compare this then to what happened in the during the civil rights movement. Civil rights movement right now, just to do black and white, blacks are maybe 15–16% of the population. Some cities higher, some cities lower nationally. Certainly in the South, in many cities it was more, but there were also places where it was a lot less. Do you think we ever convinced, in the 1950s, 60s, do you think we ever convinced the majority of white people that we had the right to sit next to them on a bus or eat next to them in a restaurant? So what do you think, why do you think the laws changed?
Pressure.
Boycott is my opinion.
What is it?
As to why the laws changed. Boycott. A refusal to fund the people who are oppressing you. And I actually specifically have been thinking about this after you said we need to protest things, we need to have a response that is protest. And I think, especially when you're talking about criminalization and the government, that you cannot protest an entity you are funding. If we are going to say, hey, you can't give that guy a ticket, or hey, he can't pay that ticket, we need to organize in a way that we're not paying either. And there's, not paying taxes, not participating in whatever way, but in Madison, my problem is that we have solutions that address land, we have solutions that address equity in housing. We have low-income housing for people. It is distributed inappropriately to rich, not rich, whatever, yes, rich college kids or people in a place of access.
But I think you're exactly right on the reason why we were able to get the laws changed was because of we did not fund, we boycotted, we did not fund. So we have actually, we'll try to do this in a couple of minutes, but we have this part that I'm doing now is normally a 2-hour workshop to explain this. So we're going to try to boil down a 2-hour thing in 2 or 3 minutes. But so in the 1950s and 60s, when we did these civil disobedience acts, which we're now saying we're doing them and we're calling them positive action because of one particular distinction. What we did was we went into a restaurant, for example, that didn't allow black people to eat, and we sat in at the restaurant, all black people, and as a result of that, the restaurant could not serve any food. So at one point, the restaurant was making money by enforcing segregation, being engaged in segregation, and at the next point, at the point of this action, it could have gone out of business by continuing to engage in segregation. And in fact, in many cities, when these actions happen, the ones when the city council, the city commission had to vote on ending segregation laws, the ones who were begging the city to do it were the small business owners who were about to go out of business from these actions. And so literally, racist, rabid racist small business owners would be saying, I don't like black people, I don't want them in my restaurant, but they're there, and if we don't end this law, I'm gonna go out of business. You have to stop segregation. Not because I love them, not because I've seen the light of the way, not because I'm convinced of the morality of it, but because I'm gonna go out of business. And so we were able to achieve this, not because we were able to convince even one person that it was the moral or ethical thing to do. It was only because we were able to do this properly. We were able to do it. Now, we talked a little bit, so if we do this well, it will, if we do it right, and we do it at critical mass, we do have to have a certain number to do it. It can't just be 5 or 6 of us doing it, because we'll just get arrested and beat up. It has to be a critical mass. If we do this right, they will have no choice but to change this, because it'll actually cost them more money to keep doing it the same way than it would to change it to the way that we want it. It'll actually cost them more money. More business would have went out of, more places would have went out of business if they would have kept segregation, because we would have blocked them from getting it, than if they would have ended it. So that's what. So we're talking about distinguishing properly between a tactic and an objective, right? A little bit earlier, we need to just make clear, I don't want to support any laws that are unjust. I don't want to, follow laws that are unjust. But the reason why we don't engage in civil disobedience or positive action because we like to. We don't do it just because we want to break the law. We do it because we want people to, in this case, want people to have housing. That's why. So if we can find a way to get them housing that doesn't result in us getting beat up and arrested, then I think we should do that. That's the only way we do it, and that's the way we should do that. But our goal is not to protest, and our goal is not even to change the law. Our goal is to get people housing. And if we have to change the law to get people housing, that's what we should do. I don't like negotiating with anybody, but if what I have to do in order to get people housing is negotiate, then I want to negotiate. Not because I want to negotiate, because that's what we have to do. But we're going to have to, I'm not sure we're going to convince, certainly not any banks, we don't have to convince them that housing is a human right. We have to convince them that if they don't change, they don't support changing the laws to housing is a human right, then we're going to take over all of the vacant homes they have, and they will lose everything. That's what we have to convince them.
And to be clear, like the garden piece isn't an issue of the third way, that's a public policy issue. Right? Like that's why it's happening the way that it's happening, and that's why we're trying to negotiate, because that's not a third way fight, it's a public policy fight. And that's why it feels and shows up. When it shows up, the third way really answers what do you do if you win. Right? And using Max's example of the civil rights movement, the third way was integration. Right? That's what happens if we win. This will happen if we win. Largely, we'll get some like that was the third way, and I think what sets this apart from a lot of movements that we've seen is there's a material base for struggle, right? So here, if we win, we'll walk away with houses and land and crops, and that's different. But like the struggles that Max just talked about, we don't necessarily need to be going. Like I don't think the way to do it is that you're going to change the hearts and minds of. That was never our fight. And if you look at the work and take back the land, we're strictly in the positive action, but we've acted in other parts because we had to, not because we thought that, oh, we could just convince Bank of America. You know, like we don't do actions to change the heart of the CEO of Bank of America. We do it to, like Max said, to raise the social cost where it becomes unprofitable for Bank of America to continue the way that they are.